with Dr. Allan Frankel today, who is one of the doctors I consulted with during my treatment. He is a graduate of the UCLA Medical School, finishing second in his class. He completed his residency at UCLA Medical Center, became a clinical professor, and did clinical medicine at UCLA for about 18 years. He was elected to the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society, and for 3 years, he was selected as one of LA Magazine's top internists. However, more than 20 years ago, a respiratory virus caused congestive heart failure, and Dr. Frankel was told that he had only 6 months to live. He used cannabis to alleviate his symptoms, and with continued use, his health improved. At that point, Dr. Frankel decided to focus his practice on the plant's healing properties and has since become the most outspoken expert for medical cannabis in this country. With more than 35 years of experience in internal medicine, Dr. Frankel applies his knowledge of the cannabis plant and its therapeutic value to the treatment of multiple serious medical conditions, which is one of the main reasons why I wanted to talk with you today, Dr. Frankel, because the tincture that you prescribed for me during my cancer treatment, it helped me tremendously with the harsh side effects of chemotherapy. And I believe that many other cancer patients can benefit from this plant too if they understand the benefits of the plant and can talk with their oncologist about whether or not to add cannabis to their medical and/or holistic treatments. He has his own cancer story too, which he's willing to share with us today. And last but not least, he is the grandfather of 7 grandchildren. Hello, Dr. Frankel. How are you doing?
Hi there. Yeah, I've had 2 times in my life, one in 1999 with the congestive heart failure where I was given 6 months to live without a heart transplant. And started using cannabis because I was depressed and agitated. And 6 weeks later, my heart was normal. And there was no data at the time, and I certainly don't know for sure, but there is data now about THC in treating congestive heart failure. So whatever, my heart's normal now, and I never had to have my chest cut. But my life, I mean, I have raised 3 children, 2 of whom are doctors, the other one's married to a doctor. And I love the practice of internal medicine. And after I got sick, I had to sell my practice. And then all of a sudden, I thought I was going to die. And then all of a sudden, I'm not dying. And I went on to live another part of my life. And for 15 years, now just about 15 years, I started studying cannabis and started Greenbridge Medical in 2006. I was reasonably healthy until the fall of this past year, just like 5-6 months ago, and I started getting lightheaded, dizzy. I had tremendous pain in my shoulders, my back, my spine, hips, but I attributed it all to me being an old guy, But I was sick, and finally on November 21st, one of my friends fortunately basically picked me up and took me in, and turned out I had prostate cancer that I had ignored for, I guess, a few years. It must have taken to get this high. But my PSA, for those who know, a normal PSA is below 4. Mine was 6,000. And we started treatment with hormonal blockers and cannabis. And I think they've both been extremely helpful. There are a lot of side effects, even with hormonal blockers, that I don't have. I think that's part of it. But I've been dealing with cannabis and cancer for a very long time. And I think there's no question at this point that cannabis does help suppress tumor growth. Pretty much all the major cannabinoid molecules are in fact active against cancers. And despite the fact that some people are saying, well, we know exactly what the best treatment is for breast cancer. We know the best, if it's hormonally sensitive or hormonally not sensitive, or lung cancer or prostate cancer. We don't know. I mean, at least I don't know, and nobody doing these studies in Israel knows. So I don't think these people know. So my philosophy overall, with aside from nutrition, and also if somebody is qualified for chemotherapy or immunotherapy that makes sense, the cannabis just makes it so much easier to do it. Cannabis became marijuana in 1934 because DuPont and a few other people that were trying to wreck hemp, because they either were DuPont and into plastics where hemp could be competitive, or Hearst and the San Francisco, I guess, Chronicle, whichever he wanted. He had lots of forest. So they needed, but cannabis and hemp were considered to be wonderful things. And the pharmaceutical companies were still using. In 1860, pharmaceutical companies like Merck and Sharp and Dome, Lilly, all of them made cannabis tinctures. But they stopped using them 15 years before it became illegal because they weren't dosed. They weren't the same. We didn't have gas chromatography machines then. I like to go back in time with a gas chromatography machine, and cannabis would have been a huge thing. It was just that fluke of 10 years in technology. And I think it's going to become a dramatically bigger thing.
The tincture that I take is one I think that you developed. It's called the Quad, and it's 1-to-1 to 1-to-1 CBD, CBDA, THC, and THCA. And I think you developed that, right?
Yeah, what I do is I come up with formulas that seem to make sense, and then I hand them out to different dispensaries. Most dispensaries are not interested in making them, which I think they should. But the problem is the vast majority of dispensaries are interested in recreational, and this is not a recreational product. Dr. Raphael Meshulam in Israel in the mid 80s or early 80s actually, started thinking about, we've got THC, we've got CBD, we have these other analogs of the cannabinoids that act somewhere. The question is, where do they act? What receptors are there for the cannabinoids? They clearly have effects, so they clearly, and it turns out, of course, cannabinoids CBD has 500 places where it can actually fit in. So the endocannabinoid, I like to break it down into endocannabinoid and exocannabinoid. Endocannabinoid system is a system that's probably 1 billion years old. I mean, animals, sea creatures from a long, long time ago had endocannabinoid systems, and anything with any level of central spine is going to have an endocannabinoid system. And the endocannabinoid system is, in my opinion, the answer to the question of the mind and body. I mean, all of a sudden, they're the same. I used to say that the connection between the mind and body is the neck. I mean, you have the head where you have all the thinking, then you have the body, and you have this neck with millions of bytes going up and down. But the endocannabinoid system will give you weird results. There can be all of a sudden a medicine applied to a right foot. We saw this recently, THCV, and after 10 minutes, this patient, every single time she put this transdermal thing on, she developed acute abdominal pain for 10 minutes. I mean, to the point where she doesn't know what to do. How do you explain something like that? It's those are the types of things where the endocannabinoid system, or deficiencies of the endocannabinoids, just like we can have deficiencies of thyroid, we can have deficiencies of cortisol, we have deficiencies of serotonin and dopamine. So we're now being able to document and actually measure the levels in blood of the endocannabinoids. And we're looking to do some studies where we give people exogenous, like cannabis, cannabinoids, and see what happens to their endocannabinoid level. And I've noticed for many years that over time, people need less cannabis for the most part, unless they're trying to get stoned, then they need more and more. But for pain, for anxiety, for mood issues, for cancer, probably the dose required decreases with time. And I think it's because this is a plant. I mean, it is a plant. It's nutrition. And maybe the nutrition takes care of the need, and maybe we bump up our endocannabinoid system. And there's already some data showing that you can measure the endocannabinoids, like anandamide and 2-AG and hundreds more. But those are the two main ones. That you give somebody a dose of CBD, you measure their endocannabinoids before and afterwards, and we're seeing them increase. So right now we're working on figuring out how to get these lab tests done, which we're probably gonna have to go to the University of Mississippi. But we can ship to them blood samples and even oil samples through the mail, and the University of Mississippi, NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, takes the oils that we send them. I find it really amazing. There's two ways to test for endocannabinoids. The more complex but more accurate way is to check spinal fluid. But that was more 5-10 years ago. Now we're finding that as labs like NIDA in the University of Mississippi are able to measure very, very tiny levels of this, they're actually able to do a regular blood test and draw the plasma off and measure the endocannabinoids and cannabinoids. And in Mississippi, I don't know how this ended up at the University of Mississippi, but they've got, they're the ones that supply all the cannabis for any study in the country. There are hundreds of receptors for the cannabinoids. The ones we talk about the most are of course, CB1 and CB2. For example, with CBD, it doesn't have really any direct action on cannabis receptors that we know of. We actually don't know exactly how CBD works. THC for sure stimulates the CB1 receptor. And THCV, it acts even more complicated. It's unbelievably complicated, but it's effective medicine because of that. The
Okay.
FDA refers to this as complex medicine, which I find entertaining. The entourage effect, as described by Dr. Ethan Rousseau and Mishulam, it's a wonderful word, and it was a TV show. The entourage effect states that all of these hundreds of molecules working together works better than just CBD alone. Now, to me, that's so overtly obvious. But what's out there, people are saying, oh, pure CBD. What you want is pure CBD. Now, if it's CBD that's free of contamination, that type of pure is good. But if it's pure CBD because it's one molecule and just CBD, come on. How is that supposed to work as well as this whole rich plant? It makes no sense. I don't get it. Except that the money is way more in the hemp field. Way more. You can sell the stuff everywhere, right? So that's what's happening.
Why do you think there's a stigma attached to medicinal cannabis because of the recreational use?
I think people still see it really the same and connected. Most people could not even begin to understand what the difference between recreational and medicinal is. This is all because we were told this was evil. I mean, it's the most, eventually we're going to look back upon this as just a tragedy, because had this not happened, and once pharma got the wind of pills and stamping out pills as opposed to making extracts from plants, they had to get rid of cannabis. They had to get rid of it. But I've spoken to several people that are big shots in the pharmaceutical industry. One of them came up to me after I gave a talk in Europe a few years ago, and he said, Dr. Frankel, you're cheating. I said, I probably am cheating, but what are you specifically talking about? And he said, you're using whole plant. And I said, oh yeah, that's definitely the way to cheat. And this guy was a physician working for a pharma company, where the pharma company is getting frustrated that they can't compete. I mean, I could still make a better extract in my kitchen than pharma makes and sells as Epidiolex. I mean, that's not hard to beat. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. Recreational is casual, meaning there's no particular goal. You're not treating some pain in your back. You're not treating anxiety or insomnia, where there's going to be an outcome. You're sleeping better. You're less anxious. You have less pain. One is casual, which is recreational. The other, medical, which is focused, means you're focusing just on the medical symptoms and what extracts might be used to treat the patient, and everything's by the milligram. There is no smoking. There is no big edible. It needs, I mean, this is what the edibles should be. I mean, it's ridiculous that it's in food. I mean, to me, when I actually wrote a blog about this, the capsule plus a Sara Lee brownie, perfect. Take the capsule and half an hour later, or eat the brownie and a half hour later, take the capsule. Much cheaper and much better medicine. This is the way. It is crazy that we do this in food. It is nuts. And I can't wait to see these restaurants and valet parking, and these people come out stoned. The next morning, everybody's car is going to be in a different place. I mean, I think it's pretty funny.
Is it because when you're taking it with food, you're not sure of the dose that you're getting?
You think if you go into a restaurant that's giving you a linguine and chicken dish, that they're going to be able to tell you the breakdown of all the cannabinoids in that meal? No. To me, I'm against it. I think it's dangerous, and we don't need to put this. I mean, somebody else would argue that we do this with wine, but with wine, I would argue, even though I'm not a big wine person, that people that are drinking wine or using alcohol in general, they know more about the dosing of their alcohol than the vast majority of people know about the dosing of cannabis. That's the problem. When you go into edibles, as you know, it could be an hour and a half later, all of a sudden, just when you're going to get your keys for the valet parking, I don't know. It seems, I don't think we're there yet. Depends. It depends upon what you're using, whether you're smoking, vaping, cooking, using a tincture, how many milligrams of CBD, THC, THCA, CBDA, THCV. These are all variables. And I'm just starting, actually, in case somebody hears this and has an idea. I'm looking for a really good software programmer because I have a great idea on how to start tracking this data so we can really figure out what works. And I've done a lot of software development in my life. And I just need a company to work with me. It'd be very exciting. People could then look up and see what is most likely extract to start with. Yeah, kind of what the cannabinoids do, particularly CBD, is for the immune system in particular, it doesn't inherently increase immunity or decrease immunity. It modulates immunity so that there are some diseases where people have an excessive amount of, you have to calm it down, and sometimes they don't have enough. So the CBD is a great modulator. CBD is a pretty good anti-inflammatory, but THCA, the raw form of THC, is an incredible anti-inflammatory. So for many patients now with inflammatory processes, I give them a combination of CBD and THCA, and it's been incredibly effective. For any old guys out there, it also is terrific for your prostate. I mean, I don't get up at night anymore. It's amazing. I had a patient, 72 years old. He's one of the people in this little group that we're studying with prostate cancer. He would wake up 8 times a night, so like every 45 minutes. He was exhausted. He now wakes up once a night. Just from, and if anybody doesn't have, you don't need sophisticated, take a quarter of a gram of raw cannabis, break it up, mix it in a little yogurt or pudding, eat it a little bit after dinner, and you won't wake up as much to urinate.
Somebody should tell it. Somebody should tell that to Howard Stern, because he's always on his radio show talking about how he gets up and pees in the middle of the night. It's like all the time.
I'll talk to him about THCA and urination.
Okay. I'm going to forward your information.
I'll respond that it works by the same mechanisms that chemotherapy and immunotherapy work. And we're finding more and more molecules, more and more oils that are effective against more and more cancers. And I think the future of it is huge. The cannabinoids work both directly on cell receptors, and tumors that don't have any cannabinoid receptors, I don't think are going to end up responding well. Fortunately, all the major cancers do have them.
Can they stop the growth of cancer?
Yeah, there's no question they can stop the growth of cancer. And with glioblastomas, we have the most objective evidence where a double-blinded study was done. And in stage 3 of the study, they had to stop it because the cannabis plus Temodor was doing much, 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 much better than just Temodor. So the cannabinoids work by inducing apoptosis, which is cellular suicide. They decrease, just like Herceptin, they decrease the blood supply to the tumor. One of the major things they do is they elevate our anandamide, which is one of our internal endocannabinoids. And anandamide is our cancer screener. So it's looking out for cancer cells. And if our anandamide is suppressed, we can't deal with cancer as well as if it's elevated. So anything that elevates anandamide is going to increase it as a cancer scavenger, so to speak. We've seen cells die, under the microscope. And with extracts, and there's a study in Israel now going on where they're taking, when the original, and this is very exciting, when they're taking the original biopsy of the patient, they send some to the cannabis lab to test it against different cannabinoids. And I just sent them a note to see if we could message them or send them a bottle of the 4-in-1 molecules just to see how its kill rate is different. But I think maybe what you were trying to get to, which is we've got, on one end, we have symptoms, all the symptoms related to cancer itself, related to chemotherapy or radiation therapy. And then there's the actual effects on the cancer itself. So on one end, we were starting with CBD and THC in equal doses for the cancer, because that's where all the studies that are being done in Israel and Europe were being done. But we added, as THCA became a potential anti-cancer molecule, we added that in, and then when CBDA became more readily available, we added that in. And if you think about it, coming up to the mountain, climbing the mountain from two angles, one is symptom control, and the other is anti-cancer. We were working from both ends, and we ended up at the same place where the dose of for symptoms ended up being the same that seemed to be, at least according to studies in Europe and Israel. Because I mean, how would I pick up what dose for cancer? I mean, I'm not a Rick Simpson fan. I don't think that it makes any sense to just use THC. I don't think it makes any sense to use a THC at a dose that's really toxic to most people. And why would we want to leave out the other molecules? And we see people doing great instead of 800 milligrams of THC, and that's it, having 120 milligrams per day between the four cannabinoids. And there's going to be more studies, and I can't wait till studies come out, because I think we're doing well.
When we had our original consult on the phone, and I was telling you I was going through chemotherapy, gemcitabine and carboplatin, and then Avastin, and you knew exactly what to start me on, and I was just curious, what was it about? Was it what I was on? Was it the type of cancer I had? Was it my symptoms? What drew you to that conclusion?
Well, to some extent the symptoms, but let me be just completely open about this.
Yeah.
Nobody, in my opinion, nobody, including myself, knows at this point in time which cannabinoid at which dose is the best for which cancer in which patient. We don't know. And anybody who claims they know, I would love to talk to them and see what the data is. However, we know that these four cannabinoids, or the oils of those four cannabinoids, in every studied shows anti-cancer effects. And we're actually doing a little study on prostate cancer, which I have a special interest in. We're taking 6 men, maybe it'll be 8, who are in their late 60s, who have a PSA of 8 or 10, a tiny, tiny little cancer, and nobody wants to do anything about it. So those are perfect patients for me to experiment on or do a little research. So we put them just on a pretty decent dose, just of THCA, and we're watching to see what happens with the cancer, because we can afford with these patients to wait a few months. But certainly the THCA helps urinary frequency, urgency in both men and women, which is a good little tip. But right now, the experiences we're having with our patients, some are just using cannabis, some are on chemo, some are on chemo, immunotherapy, and radiation. And what happens all the time, and I'm so grateful this happens, is a patient goes into remission, they stay in remission, and they come in and ask me, what did it? I don't know. And I've not yet met a patient who was really upset with that answer. And what do I think is probable? I think there's a ton of things that can kill cancer and help us. And we've been suppressed. I mean, cannabis before 80 years ago was not a bad plant. I mean, to me, it's the same as saying, you know what? And it's true, we have not studied the tomato plant. We have not studied the asparagus plant. What if they're dangerous? I mean, do we know? Have there been any studies? Of course not. It's food. We know what food is poison. We don't eat rat poison. So it's just food. There are human studies going on now. The glioblastoma was a human study. That wasn't animals, those were real people. And what we're seeing with glioblastoma is remarkable, really remarkable. It's very, very exciting. We have 4 patients actually in Ohio, of all places. Started with 1, and she had failed chemo, radiation, surgery, a second chemo. And so then she just went on, I mean, she was put in hospice. 4 patients like this in Ohio, which is weird. And these people ended up going to complete remission over a matter of months. It's beyond a coincidence now with the trial. What's going to happen? I think that more and more studies will be done. In the US, it's almost impossible to do a reasonable study because the pharmaceutical companies and the DEA suppress it. And in order to do a publishable study, in theory, you need to get the cannabis from Dr. El Soleil at the University of Mississippi, and they're not dosed products. I mean, why do we really want to deal with smoked weed in a test? I mean, come on. So we're really working hard at setting up a study where we can start people on a certain number of milligrams and see what happens with them and see what the outcome is. It'll be a gigantic database, and that's what needs to be done. For our cancer patients, particularly prostate cancer, we're doing a little study now with 10 of our prostate cancer patients who have PSAs in the 8 or 10 range. They have very limited disease. They're late 60s, early 70s. Nobody wants to treat them. So I have the option of experimenting a little bit because there's no downside. And THC acid, I'll know more in a few months, but I'm fairly certain is a very big deal with prostate cancer. And THC acid you can just get from raw bud. I mean, you take a gram of bud and you take about a fifth of it on the scale, and I prefer crushing it up with my fingers, because if you put it into a machine, you're going to heat it up some. And the heating, of course, is going to cause some of the THCA to convert to THC.
You were telling the story about your prostate cancer early on, and I don't think you ever got to where you are now with it.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was pretty remarkable. Actually, I started the cannabis first because they were trying to decide which hormonal blocker to use. One was, frankly, ridiculously expensive. But one of my sons actually didn't tell me. He just went and paid for it without telling me, because he didn't want me to feel uncomfortable. So I have the best kids ever. But the combination of the hormonal blocker and the cannabis, my PSA went from 6,000. I had a blood count I was severely anemic. I had unbelievable pain. Within a few weeks, my PSA was down from 6,000. After 3 weeks, it was down to 10. And for the last 3 months, it's been 0.6. So there's no evidence of any disease. So I'm happy. I'm grateful. And I'm taking advantage. I mean, it's one of the things to do with cancer is, if you're fortunate enough to be doing reasonably well, to me, the level of gratitude that I feel I came pretty close to sayonara, and now I feel like I'm 70. No, I feel good. I feel really good, and I know the cannabis is a part of it. My friends are a big part of it. My family's a big part of it. One thing, if you have cancer or any serious illness, and you'll go through in your mind, no, I don't really have that. Oh, I do have it. It's finished. So, yeah, I think we need to get access to this medicine to everybody. And that's definitely one of my goals. And you should be able to be in whatever country you want to grow little plants like this. The reason autoflowers became popular first in Europe, because they don't have the space that we do in the United States, because they're adorable. I mean, strongly recommended.
Well, okay, you have a success story. I have a success story. I'm showing no evidence of disease. Do you have another story that you can tell us about somebody who you worked with from the beginning to the end result?
I've had a number of it's interesting that it's pancreatic cancer, because that's what my dad died of. But we've got, I don't know, about 8 or 10 pancreatic cancer patients who are now 5-6 years out. And 2 of them were placed we've treated a number of people that were placed in hospice. And then you try to get somebody out of hospice, because one of the reasons they put you in hospice is that you're no longer going to be expensive, because you're not going to have any scans and other stuff. Well, what if all of a sudden you're not dying right away? You need to have your Medicare back generally. And that's been kind of fun to argue with them. It's kind of funny too. Say, well, hey, I'm sorry, he got better, sue me. I don't get patients that come in with stage 1 or stage 2 disease. I get, maybe rarely, but the overwhelming majority of my patients are stage 4. So they come in and maybe they don't have anything left, or maybe they got one more chemotherapy or immunotherapy that's possible, but they're too sick to even deal with that. So the cannabis then becomes a way to make them feel better, to eat and gain weight, which is essential. You cannot lose weight. If you're on such a low carb diet that you're 10, 20 pounds underweight, I think you're doing the wrong thing. You need to have your weight up. When you're down 20 pounds, your immune function is just not good. And why you talk about starving a tumor? Well, but it's okay to starve the patient. I mean, it doesn't sound right to me.
One of the reasons I came to you too was because I was having such a hard time eating and I was scary skinny. There's that movie that Emily Blunt's in, and she's like, I'm one stomach flew away from my ideal weight. I was at the point where like I've had my one cancer bout that got me below my ideal weight, you know, and so it was like, how do I get back up? And you were very helpful and inspiring for me when we were talking about the quad formula and that I'd be able to eat again. And you said wait, you said chemo is going to be a totally different experience for you once you're on this formula, and it was. I had some really horrible side effects from the gem carb, and I felt so much better, and I actually put on weight, and I was able to eat instead of force feeding myself.
Well, I think a lot of the issues that go on when people are sick with cancer and are emotional and appetite. So I mean, dealing with appetite, anxiety, sleep issues, fear of chemotherapy, side effects with chemo, side effects with radiation, all 6 of those things are pretty well treated with the major cannabinoids. And that's, again, we came up for side effects on one end, came up with cancer on the other end, ended up being the same dose, which makes sense. Makes total sense. Do you have any, I can't remember, did you have any neuropathy?
I had a tiny little bit in my the very tops of a couple of fingers and like a little bit on my big toe. But not so much. I mean, I with what I was on, they were saying that was definitely going to be a side effect, and I didn't really have that.
CBD prevents neuropathy. That's one of the biggest things. I mean, even if you're not going to do a complete cannabis protocol for cancer, take whole plant CBD. We have 20 patients in a row that got 0 neuropathy, including patients who had gotten neuropathy from the same drug previously and could never get enough of the drug to go into remission. Now their nerve pain was gone and they were able to start increasing, patient went into remission. So I'm not opposed at all to Western therapy, except in those situations where they're going to consider giving you a very toxic chemo and it has a 10% chance of helping. You know, then it's a tougher question. But I think they're meant to work hand in hand. In addition to cannabis killing cancer cells and help with nausea, appetite, pain, depression, anxiety, and it just happens to be the combination in oil form of the 4 most common molecules or oils in history. And those are equal amounts of CBD, THC, and the 2 acid molecules, CBD acid and THC acid. The acid molecules are the version of THC or CBD or any of the other 118 or so cannabinoids, is whether or not there is a carboxyl group on the THC or CBD. That's a CO2 molecule, basically, and that's how all cannabis comes when it's fresh on the vine. When you harvest it and then you start heating it, the carboxyl group goes off as carbon dioxide, and you have THC, or you have CBD, or you have CBN, you have whatever. And the importance, I mean, for a long time, I think all of us thought that the acid molecules were just there to allow us to heat or extract or cook and get THC and CBD. But it turns out that the acid molecules are every bit as important as the heated active ones. And none of them have any psychoactivity. So I think we have a ton to learn about the acid molecules. In the 30s, there were 2 different products. There was hemp, and about the same year that they started bashing cannabis, the Navy, thinking about its entree into World War II, made a film which you should all look up, Hemp for Victory. At the same time that Congress was hearing that this cannabis stuff is marijuana. So then the question is, where does the word marijuana come from? And I only found this out a few years ago. The word marijuana came from the two most common Hispanic names, Mary and Juan. This was it was bigoted, it was anti-Black, anti-Hispanic, and it's never stopped. I mean, the drug culture and crime is defined by our criminal justice system, not crime. I mean, do we really want to be involved with people using drugs? I mean, is that really, with everything in the world, is that really what we want to worry about? I mean, just get them cannabis. I mean, that's one of the things I do a lot of, is helping people get off, whether they're prescription medications or they're narcotics. We have a lot of good results with it. It works. It works. As long as, if the patient has an interest in having it work, they have to have a little bit of a commitment. But it makes it pretty easy. Yeah, well, I think it was the 80s. The schedule system was created, and cannabis, because of its competition with pharma and a number of other industries, got placed. There's 5 schedules of drugs. Schedule 1 is for drugs that are narcotics, cocaine, the drugs that are dangerous, and drugs that have little benefit. Cannabis is in Schedule 1 because they wanted to keep it illegal. I mean, to say that cannabis is as dangerous as narcotics and cocaine, it's clearly ridiculous. And we all know that this is, look, it's political, it's money, and we just need to end it and move on, because the money is now pointing in a different direction. And there are a lot of people that are really upset with our medical system, and adding in cannabinoid medicine in a very professional dose way. I mean, I love doing it because most people get better. 2/3 overall of all the patients we treat have significant enough improvement where they would say, I would do this again in a heartbeat. But yes, there's about 1/3 of people that I think will try and it just doesn't help them. Sometimes I think that people get a little bit too scared of the THC part of it, which in that case, that's what they needed, at least in my opinion, that's what they needed. But they would have a little reaction to it. They just stayed on it a few days, they'd be fine, but they're just too afraid. So that's one of the reasons we have failures. No, it's not addictive. It has in the federal studies that have been done, THC has a 4% addiction rate. 4%. Coffee has 15, cigarettes have like 40. It's very little. But people will do studies all the time where, let's say they've got these 30, there's one study I'm thinking about done on a group of 35-year-old men who'd been using cannabis casually for a number of years. And then the study was, okay, you're going to stop it today. We're going to see what happens over the next 2 weeks. Well, what happened? The people were depressed, they had anxiety, they had trouble sleeping. Does that mean this was withdrawal? No, those are the symptoms these people started with. And they're just, I mean, if you take Xanax for anxiety, unless you have something else that's going to substitute it, if you take that Xanax away, you go back to where you were or worse. At least with cannabis, it's not worse. And there's no true withdrawal. I mean, when I go travel to my kids and stuff, most of them I don't take anything with me, and off it for 3-4 days. I prefer the feeling of a little cannabis, but I'm fine without it.
Okay. And then when you're sorry, go
I'll
ahead.
never stop using it. I mean, it's wonderful.
I don't know that I'll ever stop using it either. I'm not showing any evidence of disease, and there were a number of things that I think contributed to that, cannabis being one. But I don't think I'll ever stop using it because it helps me sleep. I always have I feel like I'm always just very even keeled.
Oh, I'm such a better person with CBD. I just last week signed up for Match.com, which I'm about to like end. Boy, was there anger and rage. Either I brought it out or they had it before. I don't know. I'm done. And I was, I never thought I never thought I'd go dating again, but I don't know. I mean, when there's an open world again. it's the difference between a bicycle lane and a 10-lane freeway. Any of the single, I mean, if you just picture this plant evolving with these complex molecules that fit into the endocannabinoid receptors in our brain, that took a long, long, long time, and it works. It's just natural. This was nature. It wasn't everywhere on the globe, but it pretty much was. It's to me, it's ridiculous that we still even have a conversation about the dangers of cannabis. I just don't get it. I mean, the UCLA has done 25 years of study on cannabis smoking and lung function, and it doesn't hurt lungs at all. It doesn't cause lung cancer. It doesn't cause emphysema or bronchitis. It will cause a little cough, but that's bronchial irritation, which goes away in 3 weeks. So this is not dangerous to smoke. My patients are not smoking. I have all the patients that have pretty much never smoked, and they're terrified of joints, and they're terrified. Let me say, they're terrified of THC, and so THC's gotten a bad rap. And it's not good or bad. It's just how much. Big Pharma is kind of stuck because the DEA only allows medications that have 1 or 2 molecules. Well, that's why they make Epidiolex and it's CBD. It's just CBD. Its efficacy, very poor. I mean, I've had many patients referred by UCLA in the seizure disorder clinic because they were treated, these people wanted to use CBD. They started with Epidiolex and they just failed. And they sent those patients to me, put them on whole plant CBD, they work. For us to be thinking that this plant has been evolving for 23 plus million years with 1,000 molecules in a plant, how arrogant can we be to say, I just want that one? That's just the one. It's like comparing a vitamin C tablet to an orange. They both have some value, but come on. I mean, I don't think it's a different process. It's a different plant. It's a different medicine. And I believe the way nature has evolved this for 23 million years is good. And most things that evolve for 23 million years, that's the definition of good. They get rid of the bad stuff because it doesn't survive. So the only thing you could say is, well, cannabis is a poison. It's an inherent poison, but it's not. We know it's not. It has no lethal dose. I say the only way you can die from cannabis is if 100 pounds lands on your head. There's just no way. Would you like to know the reason why you can't die from cannabis? So glad you asked. The brainstem is right here under our head and above our spine, has almost no cannabinoid receptors. So when you take cannabis, it does not affect the brainstem, which is in charge of those boring things like breathing, heart beating. So you just can't kill a person. You can make them maybe wish they were dead if you gave them too much. Give them Rick Simpson's dose. I don't know. I mean, it's such a popular thing in the cannabis world because almost anybody can now become an oil maker. It's not my thing. Let's say here's a typical woman, was coming in for a knee replacement that was going to take place a month hence. So she had this idea. She had the idea before I had the idea. She gave me the idea. She said, I wanted to come in now so I could get started on cannabis products so that by the time my surgery comes, I can use it in place of narcotics because I'll be already adjusted to it. And I thought, you're brilliant. You're brilliant. And she was the one that said, no charge today. Let's figure this out together. And now we do it. And it makes all the sense in the world. I strongly recommend if you're up for, well, nobody's getting elective surgeries right now. We're not many yet. But if you're getting elective surgery and it's going to involve pain, see a cannabis specialist or talk to a cannabis specialist and find out how you can minimize the chance that you end up with a narcotic issue. Because there are patients out there that hate narcotics. You can give it to them. They just don't want to use it. But there are plenty of people that love it. Obviously, they wouldn't be so popular. And people don't know whether they're going to become the ones that are addicted. And it's that first dose. And if they're in pain and depressed, and you give them narcotics, I mean, you've got them hooked right then. So if you can avoid that and use, I mean, THC for pain, by the way, is better than narcotics. And now we can mix in THCV and CBD and THC and THCA. This is, I mean, this will keep me busy as long as I have on this planet. Absolutely. We've done it many times now. It has to. I mean, I can't think, I mean, yes, I have a bias. I've been doing this for 14 years, but cannabis is available. We know its safety profile. When people bring up, we don't know if it's safe, that's when I say, well, how do we know how safe a tomato is? Have you really studied? Maybe you had some symptoms 3 hours after tomato ingestion. I mean, it's that stupid. It's that stupid. Um, it's one of the most amazing plants ever. I personally believe, from things I've read, that there's a good chance Jesus was handing out this oil as the holy oil. I mean, I can't think of an oil that does more good stuff than cannabis. And the plant back then was much better than most of the plants now, because they were low concentrations, but they were really full spectrum at everything. So I wish I had to go back in time then. It depends upon the dose. There are, if you're using whole plant, um, the dosing of whole plant medicine pretty much precludes the vast majority of hepatic, liver drug interactions. But if you start getting, and this I've seen now twice in the last few months, patients were using hemp-based CBD and they have thousands of milligrams in there. And they're taking then hundreds of milligrams of CBD in the whole plant environment. For the plant, for the liver, for the patient, is safe because it's evolved that way. Now, if you just take out the one molecule of very high dose, we're seeing drug interactions all the time. And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of my concerns is the people who are in charge are going to find that out. And it scares me that they're going to come down on CBD more. So I'm grateful that a pharmaceutical company is making it, so that'll slow them up, because they can't stop us from using CBD and let them use CBD. But I don't know, a whole plant is where it's at. I mean, I will never change, never. Well, the most common one of the possible shouldn't, or what if it's somebody who, when they were in their early 20s, was using a lot of cannabis and ended up in rehab? Um, then it depends. I mean, you have to do that with respect, and um, I'm very careful about that. But I think it's worth trying, and we haven't had any blowups. We haven't had any people go into rehab. I mean, the vast majority of people. But the thing is, they have to lie when they go to their AA meetings, which is I'm really opposed to it. But I'm not going to change AA. I mean, there's wonderful things about AA that helps tremendous numbers of people. But to help the majority, they have to be very rigid. And when you're very, very rigid, some people, it's not going to work. So I see people both that are in the program and they have to lie about it at meetings, which we need to have changed. And it works. It works. But they can't share it. They can't share it. I've offered a number of times to have once a month an AA meeting at my office when I had an office, and people could then share openly about the cannabis use and how it's helping them with their sobriety. I mean, when I was practicing internal medicine, I used pharmaceutical medications to get people off cannabis. Now I'm using cannabis to get people off pharmaceutical medications. People who are just using it as PRN, as needed for a short period of time. Some people with migraines, where they treat them just when they have them, they're just using it from time to time. And there are there are a lot of people who have mood disorders that they'll usually end up over time on much lower doses, like we talked about earlier, but they need to stay on it to get enough benefit. I mean, I know that I get a lot of benefit from the CBD and THC I use, and if I stop it, I don't feel as good. I just don't feel as good. Now, does that mean I'm addicted to it? Me, the definition of addiction, which is now, I think, adopted nationally, is that you're taking a medicine or performing an activity that is destroying you, and you continue to do it, even though everybody around you says your life is now in shambles. But when you're dosing by the milligram, you just don't have that problem. I mean, it has to be by the milligram, and that's how powerful this stuff is. So when you see a hemp CBD bottle has 10,000 milligrams, think, come on, I mean, come on. That can't even be possible. And in the study that was released yesterday, I think, on the British studying of the CBD hemp products, the values were all over the place. And they said it was contaminated with narcotics, which I thought, how is that possible? And they were meaning THC, which means these people are still back in the dark ages, that they're thinking about THC as a narcotic.
Why do some doctors not know more about the effects of cannabis other than the palliative effects of it? Like, why don't they know more about the medicinal effects?
Because it's never been taught in medical school. The endocannabinoid system, I think there was one school that added it a couple of years ago, but all the doctors trained in the United States know nothing about the endocannabinoid system. I find that, I mean, I think it's clear why that's the case, but that's got to change. It will change, because you can't have drugs now that are pharmaceutical drugs, such as Epidiolex, which I'm not a big fan of, but all of a sudden you've got CBD, and these docs are going to be writing prescriptions for CBD, and they're going to be enough. I think enough of them will start getting interested. So it might be that the pharma makes a few more products that are crappy, but it gets into the protocols, so the doctors write for it, and they say, oh, this doesn't work well, but this works well. And people are, I mean, I'm very disappointed that I can't figure out a better way to teach doctors. I would love, but it'll never happen, but I would love to get a professorship back again and teach it at UCLA or one of the other places. They wouldn't have to sell the cannabis. People would get the cannabis in the same place, but then a place like UCLA could do so much more. But the politics in all these places, terrible. The last thing they want is me, because I'll go out of my way to try something, and they don't like that, which is sad. I mean, especially when you're dealing with something, it's weed, man, just weed. Well, doctors haven't figured out how to make it part of their business. And this is a tragic thing to say, but to get doctors to make a change that's not going to bring them money, not going to happen. But I think it's obviously changing. I mean, when I started 14 years ago, there were sirens of busting people everywhere. Now there are billboards. It may not be very medical, but it's out there. I mean, there's no question it's out there. And the plant, when the plant is growing, it doesn't know what it's going to be used for. It has no idea. So we need to get more people growing their own stuff.
So how come am I able to, I'm not able to get the quad formula at, say, my local cannabis store. I get it through statewide labs, and they have to hand deliver it to me. So what's the difference between what I'm getting from in the quad versus what I could get at MedMen?
The problem, and the reason I've spent so much time and energy over years now on the medicine end is, will MedMen have reasonable weed and oils and cartridges? Yes. But when you start talking about extracts and tinctures and how to dose them, it's just, they don't know how to do that. They have no idea how to do that. And I have some patients who will come to me, spend all the money to see me, and they go to a store and they let the 22-year-old decide what they do. And of course, they get whacked totally. And they somehow tie that together with the fact that I'd given them a license. I told you what to get. Why pay the money if you're not going to even try it? But yeah, it's terrible that doctors aren't learning. That's one of the reasons I want to build this software system, because I think we can build into it a way to get patients started. So it's a way to get started on initial treatment plans. So that's this next year is my project for that.
I think you also developed the Chartscape medical software program at UCLA's, and then Boyer, and then the eScript medical software utilized at Kaiser, correct?
And also the software that verifies recommendations in the cannabis world. So I'm ready to do another software product. Somebody like my age in the 60s. I mean, I didn't smoke then, but I know what happened. I was with friends all the time, and I was in Berkeley a lot. I just wanted, my father had died when I was 13, and I wanted to be a doctor. And I just thought maybe the cannabis would help distract me. And I don't know whether it would help me or hurt me. I honestly don't know. But back then, there was no question. No, but we weren't looking for back pain relief or anxiety, or we were young, we were healthy, we had nothing wrong with us. What we were looking for is to get stoned. So if you got your dealer and came to your house and you tried something and you wouldn't know if you just felt good, or if you didn't get stoned, they didn't buy it. Nobody knew, back then nobody knew about THC or CBD. They knew that some plants got them messed up and they liked those. The plants that didn't get them messed up are the ones that had more CBD and THCV, so those got bred out. And that was the baby boomers. I mean, were responsible for a number of things, but that's one of them. I thought we were going to be much better. I thought us baby boomers were going to do a good job of the planet, and we didn't.
Did you have to get the like grow more CBD in the plant, or I'm not sure what the correct terminology is, but
Breeding it in. I mean, you find first of all, you have to have lab testing. If you don't have lab testing, I remember 9 years ago there were people saying, "Well, I can smell if it has CBD." Like, come on, I mean, they can't. They can smell certain terpenes, but it was very hard to find growers to look for strains of CBD because you're dealing with pollen, and pollen will mess up their cannabis grow that they make all their money on. So I got into it, and for a number of years I was growing and breeding, and there are a number of the strains that are used now, I'm proud to say, are ones I developed. And we just shared them. I like doing that. We shared with Colorado. Charlotte's Web originally was AC/DC. And then they started using that and then making a ton of money off of it. And then at some point they switched to hemp CBD. And now the Charlotte's Web that's online is the same crap as any other hemp-based CBD product. People are getting products from California all the time, and nobody's going to stop that. But what I hope is they copy this. They copy the products and make really great products everywhere. As good as the products are that I like using, it could be better. And I know exactly how to make them better, but it's expensive. But in the long run, it'll be worthwhile to make the very best cannabis medicine we can. Nobody's doing that. I think the groups I'm working with are getting there, but they're not there yet.
what's keeping them from getting there?
Money.
And
the cost of cannabis is expensive enough as it is. If you start adding more steps and more manual, and I'll tell you what I think the best way to make oil is to hash a plant, to get the trichomes out, press them cold, and you have the best oil ever. That's the way to do it. And I think there's a way, if we can get equipment next to grows where we can do, basically you cut the plants down and you freeze them and extract them right away. So those are the ways to make the best medicine, but it's very time consuming and expensive. But I want to be involved with making the very best medicine that's humanly possible to make. And then we'll figure out how people need to pay for it. But we need to make it first. Did that answer the question? By having doses that are precise and repeatable, so that I don't have a drop. But here, let me bring back the capsule. The capsule, every time you test it, it has exactly the same ingredients. That's what we need to do. And with the California law, unless there are plenty of people in the gray area of the cannabis business. I mean, it's never been bigger because California had such high taxes. on cannabis. It's too expensive. It's ridiculously expensive. I'm actually working on I guess it'll be a blog for somebody who wants to have CBD, THC, and the acid molecules available to them at home, but they don't have the money to buy these really expensive products. There's a strain in Europe by CBD Crew, CBD CREW, and one of the seeds that they make is a feminized autoflowering seed. Autoflowering means it only grows about this big, but it's done in like 7-8 weeks. And the buds that come from this particular seed are half CBD and half THC, 5% of each. So if you use the bud raw, it's going to all be THCA and CBDA. And if you heat it by vaping it or extracting it, it'll be a 1-to-1 CBD and THC. So we already have some patients ordering the seeds and starting to grow it, because you can get like a couple 100-watt LED and grow it in any room, just as a house plant, except it keeps giving.
How hard is it to harvest it and create what you ingest?
Easy. And I'm working on a paper that will summarize that. And I think I'm going to order some of the seeds myself and just like photograph the whole stage. Because if we can start, especially for cancer patients, for the ones, I mean, what if you just can't afford the really great, cool medicine that I'm able to get? This would be a way to do it way cheaper. And I think the efficacy should be about the same. I mean, the people in dispensaries that I work with, and they hear me talk like this, they want to kill me. But there's the vast majority, at the end of the day, the vastly overwhelming majority of people will never be able to have any of this stuff. And what if they can just grow it at home in a little tent or in their living room and have dosed medicine, because we know what those genetics are. I'm about halfway done writing it. Hope is something I talk about a lot, and there's a shortage of hope. There's a major shortage. And the vast majority of doctors, we were taught, and my children who are doctors were also taught, that don't give a patient too much hope, because if they don't do well, they'll sue you. I've been doing this for a very long time. I've not yet been sued, and I give out hope all the time. And it's obviously a complete falsehood that patients are going to be angry because you were too optimistic. I mean, come on, that's ridiculous. Patients are desperate for physicians that are going to listen to them and understand them and give them hope. And I do what are called hope infusions. If somebody's leaving my office and they're still kind of down, and I'm calling them out, I touch their shoulder and turn them around and say, listen, I think you're going to do really well. That's not a lie. That's my feeling at the time. Or, and this is the biggest thing that I'll say, because it's usually true, is that I've seen many patients with stage 4 pancreatic cancer who are alive now 4 or 5 years later. So I would not think about dying for the foreseeable future. And people need that. And they tell you, they say, thanks, that's exactly what I needed. They're telling us, and I wrote a little joke in one of my recent things, and now hope is covered by Medicare. So there's no reason, no reason not to be hopeful with our patients. They're not going to call back more. They're not going to be more annoying. I mean, all these doctors are a group of strange people. They really are.
I have to agree with you on that. And the ones who were really positive with me were the ones who gave me the hope. Because if I listened to a couple of them, I would have not been the same end result, I guess I'm going to say.
I see that all the time. And I don't get it. Because I can, from 45 years of experience, I can say that giving out hope has not gotten me to be sued. And when you really think about that later, I mean, how sad that is, that you're still taught in medical school to hold off on hope. Hope increases our anandamide level. It works through, hope functions through our endocannabinoid system. And I have a blog that anybody wants to look up, hope, the placebo effect, and the endocannabinoid system on my website. And there's about 7 or 8 references there. This stuff is real. Hope is real. Um, and if you knew that exactly what day I was going to die at some time in the future, I don't want to know until an hour before. I mean, do I really need to prepare stuff? I mean, I'm going to be gone. I'm not going to worry about that.
Can you talk a little bit about the kind of research that you want to pull out from people's health history to help, and like, and what your end goal is what you think it'll show?
The end game for me is to have the ability for a healthcare person or anybody to put in the basic demographics of the patient, like female, age, name, symptom, diagnoses, put in some critical information. And then I think we can program the system to do initial dosing recommendations. They'd be a little bit conservative, but there'll be something in the ballpark. And then if that's helpful, but it's not helpful enough, then people could press a button and send their information to their doctor, and the doctor could just boom, boom, change this. I think that's possible, and that's in this next year's project. I mean, it'd be unbelievable for doctors to be able to just type it in and at least get a start and to learn from the system, because they're not learning any other way.
If you'd like to know more about Dr. Frankel and his practice, go to greenbridgemed.com. You can also book a consult online with Dr. Frankel through this website.